It's a busy year, this election year, and we people of faith want to make sure that our voices are heard. One way to do that is to help in the movement for campaign reform. That's our subject today on Austin Faith Dialogue. Stay with us.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
We're glad you've joined us today on Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Sandy Wilder, your host, and today we're talking about campaign reform, a critical issue in this election year and one that people of faith need to have their voices heard in. So today our guest is Fred Lewis. You're the Executive Director of Campaigns for People. I like the name of the organization.
Thanks.
Good to have you here, Fred. And let me make sure first that people understand what you're talking about when you say campaign reform.
We're talking about how we finance and run our campaigns, how candidates are allowed to run, where they get their sources of money, how that's disclosed and limited by the laws of the state.
The theory being that money controls the political process?
The theory being that money has an influence on how legislators may vote, and that it may influence them to vote in ways contrary to what their constituents want or contrary to what the public interest or common good is.
Tell me a little bit then about Campaigns for People. State organization, national organization, who are these folks?
Campaign for People is a group I founded. We work just on state campaign reform and ethics reform in Texas. We're a bipartisan, nonpartisan group. We have Democrats, we have Republicans. We're just people who are concerned about how we run our elections here in Texas.
Concerned just at the state level?
Correct. We figure there are enough people up in Washington working on the Washington problem that we should focus here at home, where we have 20 million people and a pretty poor campaign system.
How does our system then compare to the system of other states in the U.S.?
Poorly. Texas has no contribution limits of any kind. You can give as much as you have the wherewithal to give. So one man gave $3.8 million in state elections in 1998. Only 10 states in the union have no contribution limits. We have poor disclosure, so it's hard to tell where it's coming from that goes to candidates, which voters use to assess the candidates and their interests that are backing them. And last, we have nearly non-existent enforcement of our not very good laws.
Many people are going to be surprised to hear all this. Is Texas then worse than other states?
I can't say we're the worst, but we're down at the bottom.
And how do you suppose this has come about?
I think we've had a culture a long time of anything goes. And unfortunately, anything goes results in a system where big money, unfortunately, big money dominates the system. So you have a situation in Texas where in 1998 state elections, half the money, 60 of 120 million, came from 629 donors. And that about says it all, that it's a system dominated by just a few people. And another way of looking at state house races, half the money came from 9 zip codes. There's 2,609 zip codes in Texas. And, you know, there are people that live in those other 2,600 zip codes, and they have needs and wants and desires about their government and how it functions, as well as those in the 9 zip codes.
So if the work then of Campaigns for People is successful, what will the system look like here in Texas?
We will have complete and full disclosure, timely before the election, so you can see exactly who's giving what to whom, for what reason. We will have reasonable contribution limits, and we'll have an ethics commission that actually enforces the laws that we have.
We do have an ethics commission. What you're saying is that the commission doesn't enforce the laws that we have?
Not vigorously.
Okay. So now talk a little bit about the role of the faith community in campaign reform.
The faith community has been involved heavily in the last couple of years in campaign reform on the national level. All sorts of faiths and interfaith groups have been involved, from the American Jewish Committee to the United Methodist Church to the United Church of Christ, the Orthodox Church, almost every church that you can think of. Mainstream Protestant denominations have been involved in campaign finance reform on the national level. They haven't been involved on the state level, and that's what we've been doing. We've been organizing the religious community here in Texas, talking with folks and saying it's important for your values, for your faith, to improve our democratic system in Texas.
I assume that all these groups have said something about campaign reform, that they're not simply looking at campaign reform as another thing to check off, but they've actually made some statements, and I believe you have some of those with you.
One of my favorite statements is a statement by the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission, which is part of the General Baptist Convention here in Texas. And they've come out strongly for campaign finance reform and are working closely with our group, as a number of other folks are. And their quote is, and I think it says it all, "We must protect the rights of the disabled and the poor. We must assure that our political system is not partial to those who have the power of great wealth. Full recognition of these responsibilities means that Christians must call for reform of the current Texas campaign finance regulations." So the view is that a system this dominated by very large contributors will never reflect the values we have to help those that are less fortunate, to even help and assist average folks. We also have a view from the Catholic Conference. It's a statement adopted by the Wisconsin Catholic Conference, and that we're asking the Texas Catholic Conference to endorse, and they're also supporting our efforts and working closely with us. And they quote Pope John Paul about how important democracy is for citizens. It says, "Democracy is only possible on the basis of a correct conception of the human person, which involves the recognition of the right of each person to take an active part in public life." And what he's saying there is that you don't have a real role for people, an active participation in public life, when what the system really is about is giving large donations. It isn't about being a participant and have the ability to affect your community and affect your life. And we know that's true because we have large support in Texas for telemarketing fraud laws to protect the elderly, for environmental laws, and other laws that never get passed because those that give large contributions don't want them to be passed.
And what is the model in other states? Can you say anything about how other states have approached campaign reform, especially how the religious community has done?
The religious community has been very active in other states. I know have been active in Illinois and Wisconsin. Sometimes they've come out for public financing of campaigns, which we have in about 6 states in the United States, full public financing. And we have partial public financing in about 20 other states. In other situations, they've been supportive of contribution limits and disclosure, like we're talking about for Texas. Other times they haven't come out for specific proposals, but have worked for generally a system which allows more people to participate, that allows full disclosure of what's going on, mainly a more principled approach as opposed to specific solutions. But they're, across the United States at the national and state level, the religious community has been involved, and that's why I'm here today. I want to get them involved here in Texas because we have a system that really
There's a term that some folks may not be familiar with, and that's public financing. How is that different from what we're doing now?
Public financing is where the government funds the campaign, so there is no private money. We actually have partial public financing here in Austin. If a candidate gets into the runoff for city council and has signed a certain pledge, they'll abide by certain principles, then they receive public financing. And in fact, Raul Alvarez and Rafael Quintanilla both received about $30,000 in public financing just several months ago.
Wouldn't the argument be, though, that, gosh, that's going to raise my taxes or that's going to have some negative effect on me, public financing?
Well, we're not talking in Texas about public financing. We're talking about limits on how much a candidate can give. But there's also a cost to what special interests want. Tax loopholes, regulatory advantages. It's very costly to have a system which is dominated by special interests who are looking out for their narrow needs rather than the public good.
Well, The election will be over, the national election will be over in just a few months. But talk about the long haul, because my guess would be that you won't be finished with your work between now and the fall.
I won't be finished with my work until I'm very gray. And I'm getting there a little bit by little bit. What we think is important at this first session coming up is that we get full, complete, and timely disclosure. And in particular, that the employer and occupation of large contributors is listed so that you can see what the economic interests are behind a candidate. So if the candidate sits on a committee, if the official sits on a committee that regulates an industry and that industry is giving them most of their contributions, that the voters can hold that person accountable. Right now, it's almost impossible to tell where the money's coming from, and by the time you get it, it's such old news that no one's interested.
So this is not something currently covered by public disclosure, public information
No,
laws, correct?
we don't have disclosure of what happens in the last 10 days of a campaign, so that's when all the large tainted money comes in. We don't have disclosure of the employer and occupation. Out-of-state political action committee money is not disclosed in Texas in most instances, and we have a very poor laws about, quote, independent expenditures, end quote. So we have a lot of things that we need to improve.
And you say that folks on every point in terms of their religious faith are involved, correct?
That's right. And in fact, disclosure is something that is the foundation of every type of campaign reform system. There is no system that does not have disclosure, whether it's public financing, contribution limits, or just disclosure. And it's something we should all be able to agree, which is that we have open politics, that it's all out in the open rather than the closed system and closed politics we have now.
You've bitten off something pretty big to work on for the next several months, and just
next several decades.
Right. Just briefly before our break, tell us just a few sentences about the march, and then we'll come back to that after the break.
It's important. The only way this system is going to change is for people to get involved, for people to say they care about their democracy. And we're giving them a way to do that, which is to go to our website and say that they support reform, and that's www.hadenough.net. And basically with that, we will keep them informed of what's going on so that they'll know whether or not the legislature is making progress on reform.
And you're calling it the Million Mouse March, as I recall?
Well, it takes a lot of mice to bring down fat cats, and also it's the computer mouse. It's
right.
A march on the internet. You don't get tired and sweaty in the heat having one in the summer. You don't have parking problems in Austin, that sort of thing.
There'll be a lot more to talk about on this Million Mouse March. Thanks, Fred. And thank you for being here for the first half of Austin Faith Dialogue. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Glad you're still here on Austin Faith Dialogue. We're talking today in this political season about campaign reform. And our guest is Fred Lewis. You're the Executive Director of Campaigns for People.
Yes, ma'am.
And Fred, right before the break, we were talking about this march, virtual march, I guess, that Campaigns for People is organizing as a way for the public to get involved, and we hope particularly the religious public. So again, talk a little bit about what this march is and what you hope to have happen as a result of people's participation.
We know from polls and other things that the public cares a whole lot in Texas about reform, but they don't know what to do. And we're giving them a way to show that they care, to sign up. And we're hoping thousands of people all over Texas spend 30 seconds and go to our webpage, which again is www.hadenough.net, and say they support campaign reform. And if they sign up, we'll keep them informed every once in a while with an email that tells them what's going on at the Capitol and what they can do to help. So, for example, if they were on our email network now, they would know that coming up August 28th is the first hearing of the Interim Committee on Campaign Finance Reform. And they would know to go down to the Capitol on August 28th at 10 a.m. and register their concern about how we finance and run our campaigns. But that's hard to do now when you have to use mail and newsletters and all those really expensive things. And so we want to be able to keep people informed by email, which is virtually free, just like it's a virtual march.
Right, right. And now you said earlier that Campaigns for People is a nonpartisan organization. So
That's right.
say a little bit about who's actually providing the content of the site, who's writing everything that appears.
It's being written by the staff and by myself, the information, but basically we provide really quick information about how our system works, some of the stuff we talked earlier, so people can understand it better. And then we give them opportunity to express how they feel about it and to register their support. And every single person that signs up makes a difference. I mean, the fact that we've had a lot of publicity so far and people have signed up is the reason some people of the legislature have told me that we even are having the hearings at all this August.
People are making a difference already because Campaigns for People hasn't been incorporated all that long, right?
About a year and a half.
You've done some good work then. Now, what particularly would you want to see the religious community do, besides watch the show today, of course, but what would you like to see have happen?
I would like the religious community to do a couple of things. First of all, I'd like them to go sign up on our website, and I'd like them to email all their friends and ask them to sign up. It's amazing what we can do with email and how many people can end up signing up. So just doing that, just taking a few minutes would make a big, big difference. The other thing is I'd like them to come down and volunteer and help us. Instead of perhaps participating in a political campaign where they may be alienated, have a system where we have television and no volunteer efforts, we're having a pure volunteer effort to get people to go to our website, to get out our name, get out the campaign. And they can call us up at our headquarters here in Austin. It's at 19th and Guadalupe, not too far from here. And the number is 708-0888. And we have plenty of things to do and plenty of people to contact.
Plenty of things to do. For instance, what might folks be working on?
Well, we're going to try to email people that we know and send postcards to people that we know care about campaign finance reform. And we want to put signs up all throughout Austin. And we want to send people out to groups and meetings to talk about campaign finance reform. And we have materials to hand out. And we have all sorts of things to do. We have more to do than we can do because this is a real grassroots effort. We do not have a lot of money to buy billboards or TV. We're relying on a grassroots effort to get the word out.
And what specific efforts has Campaigns for People done within congregations, within faith groups, since we're trying here to talk particularly to that part of the population?
Well, we're going to be having a forum with Texas Impact in the fall in which we talk about campaign finance reform and the religious community. We have the support of a number of organizations which we've become involved with here in Texas, the Texas Catholic Conference, Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission, Texas Impact, the American Jewish Committee here, and the American Jewish Congress are all going to be helping us. And we're also going to be trying to get specific denominations who have agreed nationally for campaign finance reform. We're hoping they'll focus here at home with the people's lives here in Texas. We probably have a little we can do about what happens in Washington. We can have a lot to do about what happens here in our own home.
Is it true, what might be some folks' perception, that campaign finance reform is primarily an issue for those folks who are on the left in the political spectrum?
No. I have people on my board from the far left to the pretty far right, and everything in between. In fact, I have an interfaith board, every possible political persuasion. They all think we need to change this system. It doesn't have to do with a particular set of policies. What it has to do is a system where the policies reflect the public's wishes, not those of special narrow interests. And the public's wishes may be liberal, they may be conservative, they may not be nothing that fits any of those. But it is the only type of legitimate policy in a democracy, and that's what people want, not what a narrow interest wants. So no, I don't think it has anything to do with liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat. And in fact, the polls I have seen show that there's almost no difference in how Republicans and Democrats feel about this, that 80% of them both favor substantial campaign reform here in Texas.
You know, the whole issue is enormous. to get an entire system moving in a different direction sounds like more than any one group of folks can do. Are there signs of hope anywhere?
Well, there's lots of signs of hope. First of all, we have 25 groups and growing that have joined us to work on this. Second of all, the Congress passed campaign finance reform a month ago. Everybody said it wouldn't happen, and they passed some new disclosure laws. 25 states from all over this country, Missouri, North Carolina, Oregon, Arizona, Massachusetts, have passed significant state campaign finance reform. There is hope. And in fact, we passed mandatory electronic filing of campaign reports last session, and that supposedly was never going to happen. So it's one of those things that it's going to happen, and hopefully sooner rather than later. It's like being in the civil rights movement in the 50s. It may seem like nothing's going to happen, but something's soon going to happen, because the system, in my view, is fundamentally flawed in that it doesn't reflect the democratic principles of our country.
So you would equate campaign finance reform with civil rights?
Mm-hmm. People, the fundamental basis of this country is that we have political equality, that all people have an equal right to participate and influence the policies of their government. And that isn't true right now. We have a system where a very few people, 14,000 people, give 85% of the contributions in this state. We have what one scholar calls a three-tier system. People who give lots of money is tier one. Tier two is the people who vote and don't give contributions. And tier three is the majority who no longer participate in any way. And that's not a way we think of our democracy. Democracy is a system where if you go out and you convince people that your arguments are better and that your policy is better, that you should be able to prevail. And that isn't the way it works here in the state of Texas right now. Money talks, and people don't.
This is a tough issue, Fred. So what keeps you going? Why are you involved in this?
Because it's the fundamental value of our whole country, democracy, that the voice of the people matters. It's a thing that we're admired about all over the world. And we're very quick to tell other countries that their system is corrupt, that they don't reflect the wishes of the public. And we don't seem to be looking very closely here at home. And I think you can't have a country, strong country, where people are alienated and don't have faith in democratic institutions. And there is a lot of cynicism, and I think justifiably so, about how our system of government functions.
Was there a particular experience, a particular something you read that really said to you, this is it, this is my issue?
What did it for me is I to help in the 1999 session, and people told us that we could not pass mandatory electronic filing, and we worked hard, and we did. And I realized that what it needed was focus and energy and effort, and if we could put a laser beam of publicity and energy related to it, that we could change things, because the system is very vulnerable, in my opinion, to change because it's so fundamentally wrong. There is very little support in the public for the way we run this system. And when you have 80 to 85% of the public who want change, you have a good base to start with.
So the organization is based in Austin. What about around the state? Satellite offices or anything like that?
Well, we're hoping someday, but we have board members throughout the state. We have board members in San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, and here in Austin. We're hoping to get a board member in the Valley and in El Paso. But we have people who've signed up for the Internet March as far away as Alpine, Texas, and way up in Northeast Texas, all over the state.
We've got a couple more minutes here. What one thing then would you want to say to the community of faith? What would you want them to hear, to do, to be excited about?
I think the religious community, the community of faith, has to get involved. This is a civil rights issue. This is an issue that affects how our government works. And our government here in Texas will never reflect the wishes of the average Texan, much less the poor and the defenseless, so long as it's dominated by those with power and wealth. And I guess I want to tell them that everything they care about is affected by how we fund our campaigns. And we need to deal with the root cause first. And I want them to, and the way I'd like them to help me deal with the root cause is to sign up on our webpage, www.hadenough.net, and to come volunteer at our headquarters here in Austin at 19th and Guadalupe. And they can call 708-0888. But it's fundamental to our whole relationships among each other and our whole democratic institutions, how we fund our campaigns.
And what will the state of Texas look like when Campaigns for People is successful?
The state of Texas will have restored its citizens' faith in its democratic institutions, and the government will reflect the wishes of the people and reflect the common good and not those of narrow special interests.
I wonder then, has anybody contacted you from outside the state to say, share your model with us?
I talk all the time to people. I borrow other people's models more than they ask for mine, but we share all the time with groups and ask them what experiences they have had and who's been involved there and what's worked and what's not worked. We're trying to be innovative and flexible. It's a complicated subject, but the fact that it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't address it.
So on your website, people can find more information as well as then sign up and say, include me?
Oh, they can find some short summaries of positions and issues, and then all sorts of links to more resources than you could ever read. There's a tremendous amount of information out there, and we point people to it on the website.
And your bumper sticker you had?
Our bumper sticker is Texans, have you had enough?
Right.
www.hadenough.net. And as you can tell, it's a Lone Star with a $ sign over it.
People should notice that. Well, Fred, thank you. I hope folks call, come by, click in. Hope you get good response. Thanks for being here. And thank you for joining us on Austin Faith Dialogue. We'll see you again next week.